starting with New Zealand. In 1953, the Korean War had just ended. New Zealand took part in this war as they fought for Britain. From 1954 to 1960, there is a decrease in the percentage of the population that 20 to 40 years old represent. There are many ways that could explain this decrease. In the 50s and 40s, New Zealand experienced the baby boom. An increase of babies in the population would cause the percent 20 to 40 years old to decrease. As these are common parenting ages, they would produce offspring, in typically twos or threes, babies thus allowing the percentage of 20 to 40 years old to decrease. Until the 70s, the population percentage basically stays in a straight line. In 1970, the population percentage of this age range increased because the babies produced during the baby boom had now reached the ages 20 to 40. Now, it has a steady increase for a decade. In the 80s, it takes another increase, and this could be because in the late 50s and early 60s, advanced birth control methods were introduced and therefore lowering the children per family, thus increasing the population of 20 to 40-year-olds 20 years later. 85 to 90, it is a relatively flat. This trend continues until 1995, where this age range experienced a dip until 2010. This decrease is because of birth control introduced in previous decades. As people exit the 20 to 40-year-old range, there are less entering, thus they are now decreasing the percentages they play in the population, overall population of New Zealand. So, if you look at the children per woman, or the total fertility, you can see that the fertility is decreasing due to the newly introduced birth controls in the 50s and 60s. Later, in the 80s and 90s, there's increase. In 1990 to 2010, as New Zealand was becoming a very developed country, modern trends of less children become more popular. Okay, taking a look at Suriname, we see beginning from the 1950, there is a dip in the populations of this designated age range. From our research, I cannot determine a particular cause because there is insufficient data available on the internet. So, then from 1960, for an ongoing 50 years, there is a rather insignificant change. If any, there is a slight decrease. If we look at 1975, Suriname became an independent country, previously being under the control of the Netherlands. Suriname, not being an independent country, could have sparked immigration to increase, and therefore population increases. The ages 20 to 40 seem to be applicable age for immigrating and finding a place to settle, because before one is 20, you are still somewhat of a child, and after you are 40, you should be settled down, or maybe you are too old. So then, in 1998, we can see that the percentage of the population that is 20 to 40 years of age start to decrease, but not very significantly. Overall, looking at the x-axis, we see that the fertility has been decreasing for decades. From the year 1950 and all the way to 1993, it has been decreasing. After 1993, it takes an increase for about 5 years, but then decreases again. This is rather odd, and it's hard to tell why this is. If we focus our attention on Turkmenistan, for 13 years, its population percentage of the ages 20 to 40 stay relatively consistent. But in 63, it takes a turn and it falls slightly. It then heads up on a steady increase till the 80s, where it has another incline increase and then levels out. Down at the x-axis, we see that between the years 56 and 64, the total fertility increases by approximately 1 child. Later, it then goes on for a rather large decrease until 2010. The need for large families was no longer as important, and perhaps contraception was introduced, and that was the reason why the fertility went down.